Your toxic job doesn't need your loyalty or your effort. It just needs one thing to control you, for you to care. Because when you care, you'll comply with the toxic workplace system, even as it destroys you. I've analyzed more than 5,000 toxic workplaces, and I've seen this over and over. The 7 levers the toxic workplace system uses to destroy you, unless you know what the levers are and how you can operate them to become untouchable in a toxic work environment. That is exactly what I'm showing you in this video. Now, it's really important that you pay attention to each one of these because these levers operate in tandem. If you skip one, you are going to become a bigger target. Control them all and you become untouchable. Toxic workplaces are intellectually dishonest. They pretend to have great leadership, ethics, and values, but what you experience day to day is the complete opposite. And there's a massive disparity between who they say they are and who they actually are, which is where the damage is done. The vast majority of toxic companies cannot admit who they really are because they're unable or unwilling to pay you enough to not care about the toxicity. Instead, they gaslight you to believe that you're the problem, not them. I experienced this firsthand in my toxic job. The company was constantly boasting about how transparent they were, how it was a core value that they lived and died by. It just so happens that this is one of my own core values. Of course, I have a sense of privacy, but professionally speaking, I'm an open book, and I expect the same in return, so this was perfect. But it didn't take long after I started working there to see that the top executive and the corporate culture were anything but transparent. My boss gatekept information from me constantly. I could interrogate him to try to extract it, and he would still withhold it, and then pretend that he would have shared it if I had asked him some magically specific question. Mind you, telepathy was not a job requirement, but it wasn't just him. The gatekeeping infected every level of the organization. The subtle sabotage became the standard operating procedure. Secrets were the norm. When I raised concerns about it and the highly visible impact that it was going to have, it wasn't the problem. My boss would double down, professing that they were transparent while they misled everyone around them, including me. Toxic workplaces operate with zero trust, and it starts with who they claim to be, and then it extends to who they claim you are. I've seen this over and over again with my clients. Your toxic boss manipulates your performance rating to pretend that you're the problem instead of their mismanagement and their rampant incompetence. You're told that you need to be professional and put up with your toxic coworkers' BS. And you should just brush off the sexist things that Greg says because he's harmless. No matter what, the onus is on you to not rock the boat. And you won't until you stop caring about the next lever. And this one, they have manipulated into making your responsibility instead of theirs. Toxic people are impossible to work with, but you're expected to do the impossible and find a way to work with them and to keep the peace. But whose peace are you keeping? Because you have none in a toxic workplace. When you contort yourself to be easy to work with, even when you're surrounded by incompetent leadership and vile coworkers, you have zero peace. You have nothing except for unnecessary stress, drama, and problems. Yet, you're supposed to keep the peace and be easy to work with for the toxic people and their enablers. This runs deep. You probably take pride in being able to work with anyone. Feel free to tell on yourself in the comments if you've fallen into that toxic workplace trap. I sure did. Until I learned the hard way that just because I could doesn't mean that I should. As a high-masking neurodiverse corporate girly, I had to develop the ability to work with everyone. I did not want to be ostracized. And one of my ADHD superpowers has always been anticipating the 87 different problems that could happen and having a plan for each one. But my brain took it too far in my toxic job. I tried to solve the problems that my boss's probable personality disorder created. So when he flew off the handle on me, the problem wasn't his temper. It was that I wasn't doing enough to avoid setting him off. But it wasn't just me. I took all the emotional labor to clean up the messes that he created when he berated other team members and they were on the edge of walking out. A lesson that I wish I learned sooner was this. When you're the person who picks up the rope in a toxic work environment, the rope becomes a weapon that they use to hang you. Since I was good at managing my toxic boss, I became the person that everybody turned to in order to manage him. Like when he woke up one morning and decided price gouging was his new vibe. He wanted to beef up numbers, so the ends justified the means, right? Well, multiple internal stakeholders did not agree with that. They thought that it would kill sales. And then of course there were all those pesky ethical concerns about it. But I had become the person that could talk sense into his unhinged whims. It wasn't until it was too late that I realized that being the peacekeeper turned me into the problem. What happened in the situation broadly is what criminologists call institutional anomie. Organizations prioritize profit over the means that it takes to get it. Late-stage capitalizing doing late-stage capitalism things. But the fallout exists, and in a toxic workplace, you're the one who absorbs it. Like in my case, my colleagues were absolutely alienated by the price gouging demand because it broke with the social contract that they operated by, honesty, integrity, and so on. But they weren't willing to put themselves at risk to stop it. So I felt like I had to fix it. Which, by the way, being the only person telling the decision maker with a probable personality disorder that they're wrong over and over and over again eventually has consequences, but we'll talk more about that later. I was the diplomat, the advocate, and ultimately the sacrifice because I wanted to help my coworkers. I was afraid that they wouldn't handle him properly, and then they would suffer the consequences. And I didn't want to disappoint anyone, so I sacrificed myself. Which brings us right to the third thing that you need to stop caring about in a toxic workplace. And this is one I wish I had known before it was too late. The harsh reality in a toxic workplace is you're going to be disliked. Actually, no matter where you go in life, there are going to be people who dislike you. They might have their reasons, they might have no reason. In a toxic workplace, it becomes a problem when it's because of jealousy. You have potential abilities and emotional intelligence that your toxic coworker will never have. This is ultimately what poisoned my working relationship with my toxic manager. When we first started working together, we actually got along great. I left a great job to join the company, specifically to work with him for a reason. And as I mentioned, I was able to manage him when I needed to make him a better leader. But as the company grew and his other team members and people across the company came to me to deal with their problems, mostly with him, he got mad about it. He was the big boss. But people were coming to me instead of him. This should not have been a surprise to anyone because I actually had more people management experience than him, even though he was senior to me. I thought that he would be relieved that I was doing the emotional labor on his behalf so that he could focus on his actual job. I mean, that is a leadership dream. But it threatened his ego. When this happened, everything shifted. I got dropped from meeting invites. I was an asset and he was using my name to build his career, but he kept me away from everyone. Our one-on-ones turned from exciting strategic conversations to hour-plus long micromanagement extravaganzas. He started to openly detest me. As things rapidly deteriorated, I did try to fix it, to get back on his good side, to fix the problem. But the problem wasn't one that I could fix because the truth was that his ceiling was my floor and he was always going to hate me for it. And it wasn't until I realized this that I stopped caring about being liked by my toxic boss. And then life got a lot more peaceful for me. I didn't need to overwork and to desperately try to meet expectations that would move as soon as I met them anymore. I didn't flinch when he tried to manipulate me to do something by telling me that everyone was complaining about me. Because if they were, I didn't care anymore. Needing to be liked binds you to the toxic workplace system. Not needing to be liked frees you from it. Because you don't just need to be liked. There is something else that you are seeking at work, and in a toxic workplace, it is used against you. You need approval. Toxic workplaces demand that you prove yourself constantly, that you're good enough, smart enough, compliant enough. But here's the thing, you will never be any of those things in a toxic job. Nothing that you do will ever be good enough for toxic leadership. You can exceed every expectation. You can be the best, the fastest, the most reliable person on your team, but your toxic manager will withhold their approval intentionally, giving you only the occasional crumb. Just enough to keep you there. And by the way, this is the same psychological mechanism that keeps people hooked on playing slot machines. You never get the approval that you deserve, just the occasional random payout to keep you playing for more. But the general withholding of approval is crucial to devaluing you, which is one of the most detrimental impacts of the toxic workplace system. In my toxic work experience, my manager didn't just withhold approval. He constantly criticized everything I did. He compared me to teammates. At one point, he actually had a guest in the office, let's call him Tim, and introduced me, explaining that Tim was my competition in the hiring process. Then after that, he would constantly tell me that he talked to Tim and he got his opinion and Tim thinks this, blah, 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 blah. Like, okay, you hired me. not Tim. But that's not what my toxic manager wanted me to think. He wanted me to feel inferior to Tim, to question myself and my abilities, to put me in my place, even if it was several shelves lower than I belonged, because he couldn't admit that I was exceptional at what I did. If he did, he knew he would never get away with his toxic behavior. He needed me to doubt myself to stay. And it was a deja vu dynamic from an incredibly toxic boyfriend that I had in college, because the dynamic is actually the same. It's why your toxic boss will praise your underperforming coworker, then turn around and criticize your accomplishments. Or they praise your coworker for the work that you actually did. And that's actually one of the biggest things in a toxic workplace. You can stop caring about what they say, stop peacekeeping, stop caring about being liked, and stop seeking their approval. But getting credit for your work is a consistent battle. Misattribution is a structural problem in a toxic work environment. The person who does the work is never the one that gets the praise for it. That praise goes to the toxic manager, their favorite employee, or whoever else is available. Anyone but the person who deserves it. But what if I told you that you needed to stop caring about getting credit in a toxic workplace? The reason why toxic people claim unearned credit in a toxic work environment is simple. They lack the ability to earn it for themselves. But that doesn't mean they can't capitalize on it. If you're in a toxic job right now, you need to know exactly when you should correct the record and when you should use it as leverage. This is actually what I did to my toxic boss, and it alleviated a ton of stress off me. Since he was gatekeeping relationships, I'm sure he was touting my ideas and accomplishments as his own to make himself look good, because they would make him look good. But what he didn't realize until later was this: his success became dependent on me. Because what would happen if I left, or gasp, he offboarded me? His supply would run dry. He would have nothing to brag about, problems that he was incapable of solving, relationships that he couldn't build off of my credibility. But there's something deeper that my toxic manager missed, and it's the exact same thing that most people who are frustrated with chronic credit snatchers at work miss too. Letting go of the credit gives you leverage. When your coworker takes credit for your work, they owe you a favor. And the more they do it, the more favor that they have for you to call in. You have evidence of their incompetence. Keep those receipts about what you do and leave a paper trail. You have proof of their lack of integrity. When you realize this, you realize that you have power in the situation, and the toxic workplace system just blinded you to it. In my case, my toxic boss couldn't fire me, at least not until he was able to replace me, and not just my job, but all the extra things that he was using to build his career. His debt became my leverage in the toxic work situation. Of course, a toxic job is a ticking time bomb, and the more leverage I had, the more dangerous I became to him. Now, I'm not the sinister type, but he was, so his fears were based on what he would do if the tables were turned. At this point, he would destroy me if he could, and he tried to. Which brings me to the sixth thing that you need to stop caring about in a toxic workplace. Because if you care about this one thing, the toxic workplace will destroy your career, your confidence, and your entire identity. There is one consistency that I have observed across all toxic workplaces. Judgment is brutal and constant. What most people don't realize is that 90% of people's opinions at work do not matter. So many of my clients have not taken credit for their work because they were afraid that they would come across as selfish or self-obsessed. Then their toxic coworker came and snatched it because they had left it lying around. This is also why you hesitate to call in those favors that you're owed for all of the stolen praise, because you're afraid of how you will be perceived. The thing is, most of those opinions are as important as having a space heater on a scorching hot summer day. Now, I'm sure my toxic boss was having lunch with Tim, complaining about how awful I was. He was shameless when he undermined my work by attributing my biggest accomplishments to other people at the company. He even started to punish the people who looked to me for leadership when he was making bad decisions that were going to hurt them and the company. But the most consistent thing he did was use status degradation ceremonies. He invited open criticism of team members in meetings. He was condescending to people that he thought were below him. He assigned junior team members demeaning tasks, things scrubbing the toilets when that was definitely not in their job description. For me, it was the micromanagement meetings that I had to endure, picking apart everything I did and questioning my abilities. But the thing was, they didn't work on me. I had already stopped caring about his opinion of me. I knew that the opinions of 90% of the people at the company were completely irrelevant. I also know that if he was dragging my name through the mud, the people that believed him were always going to believe him. What I could do was focus on the opinions that did matter. The opinions of people who could help me escape my toxic job or keep me safe while I was in it. People like higher leaders, former colleagues who could refer me to new jobs, or old bosses who could just go ahead and hire me. I focused on my reputation and my relationships because they were the life preserver that I had in a toxic workplace. And you need to do the same thing. Because as nice as it would be to walk in, tell your boss to F off, and embarrass them the way that they deserve to be embarrassed, that isn't the move. Which brings me to the final thing that you need to stop caring about in a toxic job. This is something that most people in a toxic workplace fixate on, daydream about, but falling for it is a trap, and it's one that plays right into the toxic person's game. But you're not going to fall for it because you're going to do this instead. You are not going to care about defending yourself. You are going to protect yourself. This is a key pivot that I wish I knew when I was in my toxic job, because of course your instincts scream at you to defend yourself. That is a normal human reaction, especially when you're being disrespected and treated badly at work. When your toxic boss is out there trying to make you look bad, you want to shut it down and make sure that everyone knows that their story is fiction. But the way that most people try to shut down workplace toxicity is almost guaranteed to backfire. For this to make sense, you need to see it from the toxic person's perspective. What do they want? Most people think it's to make you miserable, but that gives most toxic people way too much credit. Your toxic boss isn't a diabolical evil genius intent on ruining your life. It's much more likely that the only person that they think about is themselves. Making you look bad is just a side bonus for them, but their real goal is to make themselves look better and to put themselves at an advantage. But this also means that every time you try to defend yourself, you're playing their game, which they rigged to win. Surviving a toxic workplace requires a completely different strategy, and that's why I developed my Stay and Win framework to do the same over the last 6 years. It's built on the 3 most important principles to protect yourself in a toxic work environment: harm reduction, becoming unbothered, and positioning yourself as a hostile target. When toxic people don't win when they target you, they move on. I teach you exactly how to do this step by step in my Toxic Job Survival Pack. You can get it at toxicjobsurvival.com. While I didn't have the framework when I was in a toxic job, I was still a criminologist. I knew no matter how much leverage I established against my toxic boss, he still had more because he had the power to fire me. And I'm sure he was just waiting for an excuse to do it, and clapping back would have given him that reason. When the toxicity was rising, I was still able to manage him. But once he assessed me to be a threat to his job, there was nothing that I could do to change things. But that doesn't mean that I ignored his bad behavior. Doing so would have made me a sitting duck. As a criminologist, I clocked every power switch that I needed to activate to protect myself from my toxic boss and which ones were gonna burn me. Using those power switches bought me time until I had options. When my boss had to do layoffs and finally had the opportunity, because shocker, the company wasn't performing, it gave him the reason he was looking for, and I'm sure my name was the first on his list. While I didn't get the satisfaction of handing in my resignation notice, the day after he laid me off, I already had 2 interviews scheduled. But what he didn't see coming was the damage that firing me would do to him. And this is the power that you have in a toxic workplace, but nobody else is talking about it. You can position yourself as a hostile target, and it will reduce your exposure to toxicity while you're stuck in the toxic job, and it can create consequences should something happen to you. It's how you change the game and take your power back in a toxic workplace. In fact, I need you to go watch this video right now so you can learn how to be a hostile target today. I will see you over there.